48 Laws of Power, Chapter 24. Play the perfect quarter. The perfect quarter thrives in a world where everything revolves around power and political dexterity. He has mastered the art of indirection. He flatters, yields to superiors, and asserts power over others in the most oblique, graceful manner. Learn and apply the laws of courtship, and there will be no limit to how far you can rise in the court. It is a fact of human nature that the structure of a court society forms itself around power. In the past, the court gathers around the ruler and had many functions. Besides keeping the ruler amused, it was a way to solidify the hierarchy of royalty, nobility, and the upper classes, and to keep the eye on them. The court serves power in many ways, but most of it all, it glorifies the ruler, providing him with a microcosmic world that must struggle to please him. To be a courtier was a dangerous game. A 19th century Arab traveler to the court of Darfur in what is now Sudan reported that courtier there had to do whatever the Sudan did. If he were injured, they had to suffer the same injury. If he fell off his horse during a hunt, they fell too. Mimicry like this appeared in courts all over the world. More troublesome was the danger of displeasing the ruler. One wrong move spelled death or exile. The successful courtier had to walk a tightrope, pleasing but not pleasing too much, obeying but somehow distinguishing himself from the other courtiers, while also never distinguishing himself as far as to make the ruler insecure. Great courtiers throughout history have mastered the science of manipulating people. They make the king feel more kingly. They make everyone else fear their power. They are magicians of appearance, knowing that most things at court are judged by how they seem. Great courtiers are gracious and polite. Their aggression is veiled and indirect. Masters of the word, they never say more than necessary, getting the most out of a compliment or hidden insult. They are magnets of pleasure. People want to be around them because they know how to please, yet they neither fawn nor humiliate themselves. Great courtiers become the king's favorite, enjoying the benefits of that position. They often end up more powerful than the ruler, for they are wizards in the accumulation of influence. Many today dismiss this court life as a relic of the past, a historic curiosity. They reason according to Machiavelli's as though heaven, the sun, the elements, men have changed the order of their motions and power and were different from what they were in ancient times. There may be no more sun kings, but there are still plenty of people who believe the sun revolves around them. The royal court may have more or less disappeared, or at least lost its power, but the courts and courtiers still exist because power still exists. A courtier is rarely asked to fall off a horse anymore, but the laws that govern court politics as timeless as the law of power. There is much to be learned then from great courtiers past and present. The law of court politics. Avoid ostentation. It is never prudent to prattle on about yourself or call too much attention to your actions. The more you talk about your deeds, the more suspicious you cause. You also stir up enough envy amongst your peers to induce treachery and backstabbing. Be careful, even so careful, in trumpeting your own achievements. And always talk less about yourself than about others. Modesty is generally preferable. Practice nonchalance. Never seem to be working too hard. Your talent must appear to flow naturally with an ease that makes people take you for a genuine rather than a workaholic. Genius rather than a workaholic. Even when something demands a lot of sweat, make it look effortless. People prefer not to see your blood and toil, which is another form of ostentation. It is better for them to marvel at how gracefully you have achieved your accomplishments than to wonder why it took so much work. Be frugal with flattery. It may seem that your superiors cannot get enough flattery, but too much or even a good thing loses its value. But too much of even a good thing loses its value. It also stirs up suspicion amongst your peers. Learn to flatter indirectly by downplaying your own contribution, for example, to make your master look better. Arrange to be noticed. There is a paradox that you cannot display yourself too brazenly, yet must also get you noticed in the court of Louis XIV. Whoever the king decided to look at rose instantly in the court hierarchy. You stand no chance of rising, and the ruler does not notice you in the swamp of the quarters. This task requires much art. It is often initially a matter of being seen in a literal sense. Pay attention to your physical appearance, then find a way to create a distinctive and subtly distinctive style and image. Alter your style and language according to your person you are dealing with. The pseudo belief in equality, the idea that talking and acting the same way with everyone, no matter what their rank, makes you somehow a paragon of civilization, is a terrible mistake. Those below you will take it as a form of condescension, which it is, and those above you will be offended, although they may not admit it. You must change your style and your way of speaking to suit each person. This is not lying, it is acting. And acting is an art, not a gift from God. Learn the art. There is also true for the great variety of culture found in modern court. Never assume that your criteria of behavior and judgment are universal. Not only is it inability to adapt to another culture the height of barbarism, it puts you at a disadvantage. Never be the bearer of bad news. The king kills the messenger who brings bad news. This is a cliche, but this is truth to it. You must struggle and, if necessary, lie and cheat to be sure that the lot of the bearer of bad news falls on a colleague, never on you. Bring only good news, and your approach will gladden your master. Never affect friendliness and intimacy with your master. He does not want a friend for his subordinate. He wants a subordinate. Never approach him in an easy, friendly way or act as if you are on the best of terms. That is his prerogative. If he chooses to deal with you on this level, assume a wary chumminess. Otherwise, err in the opposite direction and make the distance between you clear. Never criticize those above you directly. This may seem obvious, but there are often times when some sort of criticism is necessary. To say nothing or to give no advice would open your wrist to of another sort. You must learn, however, to couch your advice Coach your advice and criticism as indirectly and as politely as possible. Think twice or three times before deciding you have made them sufficiently virtuous. Err on the side of subtlety and gentleness. Be frugal in asking those above you for favors. Nothing irritates a master more than having to reject someone's request. It stirs up guilt and resentment. Ask for favors or rarely as possible and know when to stop. Rather than making yourself the supplement, it is always better to earn your favors. So the ruler bestows them willingly. Most important, do not ask for favors on another person's behalf, least of all, of friends. Never joke about appearance on taste. A lively wit and a humorous disposition are essential qualities for a good courtier. And there are times when vulgarity is appropriate and encouraging, but avoid any kind of joke about appearance or taste. Two highly sensitive areas, especially with those above you. Do not even try when you are away from them. You will dig your own grave. Do not be the court cynic. Express admiration for the good work of others. If you constantly criticize your equals or subordinates, some of that criticism will rub off on you, hovering over you like a gray cloud wherever you go. People will groan at each new cynical comment, and you will irritate them by expressing modest admiration for others' people's achievements. You periodically call attention to your own. The ability to express wonder and amazement and seem like you mean it is a rare and dying talent, but one still greatly valued. Be self-observant. The mirror is a miraculous invention. Without it, you would commit great sins against beauty and decorum. You also need a mirror for your actions. This can sometimes come from other people telling you what they see in you, but this is not the most trustworthy method. You must be the mirror, training your mind to try to see yourself as others see you. Are you acting too obsequious? Are you trying too hard to please? Do you seem desperate for attention, given the impression that you are on the decline? Be observant about yourself, and you will avoid a mountain of blunders. Master your emotions. As an actor in a great play, you must learn to cry and laugh on command. And when it is appropriate, you must be able to do both, to disguise your anger and frustration and fake your contentment and agreement. You must be a master of your own face, calling it lying if you like, but if you prefer not to play the game and to always be honest and upfront, do not complain when others call you obnoxious and arrogant. Fit the spirit of the times. A slight affection of the past era can be charming as long as you choose a period of at least 20 years back. Wearing the fashions of 10 years ago is ludicrous unless you enjoy the role of court jester. Your spirit and ways of thinking must keep up with the times, even if the times offend your sensibilities. Be too forward-thinking, however, and no one will understand you. It is never a good idea to stand out too much in this era. You are best off at least being able to mimic the spirit of the times. Be a source of pleasure. This is critical. It is an obvious law of human nature that we flee what is unpleasant and distasteful, while charming the promise of delight will draw us like moths to a flame. Make yourself the flame. You will rise to the top. Since the life is otherwise so full of unpleasantness and pleasure so scarce, you will be indispensable as food and drink. This may seem obvious, but it is often ignored or unappreciated. There are degrees to this. Not everyone can play the role of favorite. Not for not everyone is blessed with charm and wit. But we can all control our unpleasant qualities and obscure them when necessary. A man who knows the court is a master of his gestures, of his eyes, of his face. He is profound, impenetrable. He dissimulates bad offices, smiles at his enemies, controls his irritations, disguises his passion, bellows his heart, and speaks and acts against his feelings. Alexander the Great, conqueror of the Mediterranean basin and the Middle East through the Indian, had the great Aristotle as his tutor and mentor, and throughout his short life, he remained devoted to philosophy and his master's teachings. He once complained that during his long campaigns, he had no one with whom he could discuss philosophical matters. Aristotle responded by suggesting that he take Callisthenes, a former pupil of Aristotle's, a promising philosopher in his own right, along on the next campaign. Aristotle had schooled Callisthenes in the skills of being a courtier, but the young man secretly scoffed at them. He believed in pure philosophy, in unadorned words, in speaking the naked truth. If Alexander loved learning so much, Callisthenes thought he could not object to one who spoke his mind. During one of Alexander's major campaigns, Callisthenes spoke his mind one too many times, and Alexander had him put to death. In court, honesty is a fool's game. Never be so self-absorbed as to believe that the master is interested in your criticism of him, no matter how accurate they are. Beginning in the Han Dynasty 2,000 years ago, China's scholars compiled a series of writings called 21 Histories, an official biography of each dynasty, including stories, statistics, census, figures, and war chronicles. Each history also contained a chapter called Unusual Events, and here among the listings of earthquakes and floods, there would sometimes suddenly appear descriptions of such bizarre manifestation as two-headed sheep, geese flying backwards, stars suddenly appearing in different parts of the sky, and so on. The earthquakes could be historically verified, but the monster and their weird natural phenomenon were clearly inserted on purpose and invariably occurred in cluster. What could this mean? The Chinese emperor was considered more than a man. He was a force of nature. His kingdom was the center of the universe, and everything revolved around him. He embodied the world's perfection. To criticize him or any of his actions would have been to criticize the divine order. No minister or courtier dared approach the emperor, even when the slightest cautionary word. But emperors were fallible, and the kingdom suffered greatly by mistake. Inserting sightings of strange phenomena into the court chronicles was the only way to warn them. The emperor would read of geese flying backwards and moons out of orbit and realize that he was being cautioned. His actions were unbalancing the universe and needed to change. For Chinese courtiers, the problem of how to give the emperor advice was an important issue. Over the years, thousands of them had died trying to warn or counsel their master. To be safely, their criticism had to be indirect, yet if they were too indirect, they would not be heeded. The chronicles were their solution. Identify no one person as a source of criticism. Make the advice as impersonal as possible, but let the emperor know the gravity of the situation. Your master is no longer the center of the universe, but he still imagines that everything revolves around him. When you criticize him, he sees the person criticizing him, not the criticism itself. Like a Chinese quarter, you must find a way to disappear behind the warning. Use symbols and other indirect methods to paint a picture of the problems to come without putting your neck on the line. Early in his career, the French artist Jules Mansart received commissions to design minor additions to Versailles for King Louis XIV. For each design, he would draw up his plans, making sure they followed Louis's instructions closely. He would then present them to His Majesty. The court of St. Simon described Mansart's technique in dealing with the king. His particular skills was to show the king's plans that purposely included something imperfect about them, often dealing with the gardens, which were not Mansart's specialty. The king, as Mansart expected, would put his finger exactly on the problem and purpose, how to solve it. At which point, Mansart would explain for all to hear that he would never have seen the problem that the king had so masterfully found and was but a lowly pupil. At the age of 30, having used these methods time and again, Mansart received a prestigious royal commission. Although he was less talented and experienced than a number of others, French designers, he was to take charge of enlargement of Versailles. He was the king's architect from then on. As a young man, Mansart had seen how many royal craftsmen in service of Louis XIV had lost their position, not through a lack of talent, but through a costly social blunder. He would not make this mistake. Mansart always strove to make Louis feel better about himself, to feed the king's vanity as publicly as possible. Never imagine that skill and talent are all that matter. In the court's art is more important than his talent. Never spend so much time on your studies that you neglect your social skills. And the greatest skill of all is the ability to make the master look more talented than those around him. Jean-Baptiste Isabey had become the unofficial painter of Napoleonic court. During the Congress of Versailles in 1814, after Napoleon defeated had been imprisoned on the island of Elba, the participants in these meetings, which were to decide the fate of Europe, inevitably Isabey to immortalize the historic events in the epic paintings. When Isabey arrived to Versailles, and Talleyrand, the main negotiator for the French, paid the artist a visit. Consider his role in the proceedings, the statement explained. He expected to occupy center stage in the painting. Isabey cordially agreed. A few days later, the Duke of Wellington, the main negotiator for the English, also approved Isabey and said much the same thing that Talleyrand had said. The ever-polite Isabey agreed that the great Duke should indeed be center of attention. Back in his stage, Isabey pondered the dilemma. If he gave the spotlight to either of the two men, he would create a diplomatic rift, stirring up all sorts of resentment at a time when people and concord were critical. When the painting was finally unveiled, however, Talleyrand and Wellington felt honored and satisfied. The work depicts a large half-filled with diplomats and politicians from all over the world, over Europe. On one side, the Duke of Wellington enters the room, and all eyes are turned towards him. He is the center of attention, in the very center of the painting. Meanwhile, sits Talleyrand. It is often very difficult to satisfy the master, but to satisfy two masters in one stroke takes genius of a great quarter. Such predications are common in life of a quarter. By giving attention to one master, he displeases another. You must find a way to navigate this Celia and Charybdis safely. Masters must receive their due. Never inadvertently stir up the resentment of one and pleasing another. George Brummel, also known as Beau, made his mark in the late 1700s by the supreme elegance and his appearance. His popularization of shoe buckle, soon imitated by all dandies, and his clever way with words. His London house was a fashionable spot in town, and Brummel was the authority on all matter of fashion. If he disliked your footwear, you immediately got rid of it and bought whatever he was wearing. He perfected the art of tying a cravat. Lord Byron was said to spend many a night in front of the mirror trying to figure out the secret behind Bummel's perfect knot. One of Bummel's greatest admirers was the Prince of Wales, who fancied himself a fashionable young man, becoming attached to the prince's court and provided with a royal pension. Brummel was soon so sure of his own authority that he took to joking about the prince's weight, referring to his host as Big Ben. Since trimness of figure was an important quality for a dandy, this was a witty criticism. At dinner once, when the service was slow, Brummel said to the prince, "Do ring, Big Ben." The prince rang, but when the valet arrived, he ordered the man to show Brummel the door and never admit him again. Despite falling into the prince's disfavor, Brummel continued to treat everyone around him with the same arrogance. Without the Prince of Wales' patronage to support him, he sank into a horrible debt. But he had maintained his insolent manners, and everyone soon abandoned him. He died in the most pitiable poverty, alone and deranged. Beau Brummel, devastating wit, was one of the qualities that endeared him to Prince of Wales. But not even he, the arbiter of taste and fashion, could get away with a joke about the prince's appearance. Least of all, his face. Never joke about the person's plumpiness, or even indirectly, and particularly when he is your master. The poor houses of history are filled with people who have made such jokes at their master's expense. Pope Urban VIII wanted to be remembered for his skills in writing poetry, which unfortunately were mediocre at best. In 1629, Duke Francesco d'Este, known to the Pope's literary pretensions, sent to poet Fulvio Testi and his ambassador to the Vatican. One of Testi's letters to the Duke reveals why he was chosen. Once our discussion was over, I knew to depart, but His Holiness made a signal and walked to another room where he sleeps. And after reaching a small table, he grabbed a bundle of papers and thus turning to me with a smiling face, he said, "We want your lordship to listen to some of our compositions." And in fact, he read me two very long Pindaric poems, one in praise of the Most Holy Virgin and the other one about Countess Matilda. We do not know exactly what the Testi thought of these very long poems, since it would have been dangerous for him to state his opinion freely, even in a letter. But he went on to write, I, following the mode, commented on each line with needed praise, and after kissed his holiness foot for such an unusual sign of benevolence. The reading of the poetry, I left. Weeks later, when the Duke himself visited the Pope, he managed to recite the entire verses of the Pope's poetry and praised it enough to make the Pope so jubilant he seemed to lose his mind. In matters of taste, you can never be too auspicious with your master. Taste is one of the ego's prickiest parts. Never unpunch or question the master's taste. His poetry is sublime, his dress is impeccable, and his manner the model of all. One afternoon in ancient China, Ko, ruler of Han, 358 to 333 BC, got drunk and fell asleep in the palace gardens. The court crown keeper, whose sole task was to look after the ruler's head apparel, passed through the gardens and saw his master sleeping without a coat. Since it was getting cold, the crown keeper placed his own coat over the ruler and left. When Ko awoke and saw the coat upon him, he asked his attendant, "Who put more clothes on my body?" "The crown keeper," they replied. The ruler immediately called for the official crown coat keeper and had him punished for neglecting his duties. He also called for the crown keeper with whom he had beheaded. Do not overstep your bounds. Do what you are assigned to do to the best of your abilities and never do more. To think that by doing more, you are doing better is a common blunder. It is never good to seem to be trying too hard. It is as if you were covering up some deficiency. Fulfilling a task that has not been asked of you just makes people suspicious. If you are a crown keeper, be a crown keeper. Save your excess energy for when you are not in the court. One day, for amusement, the Italian Renaissance painter Fray Filippo Lippi, 1404 to 1469, and some friends went sailing in a boat off Ancona, and they were captured by two Moorish galleys, which hauled them off in chains to Barbary, where they were sold as slaves. For 18 long months, Filippo toiled with no hope of returning to Italy. On several occasions, Filippo saw the man who had bought him pass by, and one day he decided to sketch the man's portrait using burnt charcoal from the fire. Still in his chains, he found a white wall where he drew a full-length likeness of his owner in Moorish clothing. The owner soon heard about this, for no one had seen such skill in drawing before in these parts. It seemed like a miracle, a gift from God. The drawing so pleased the owner that he instantly gave Filippo his freedom and employed him in the court. All the big men on the Barbary coast came to see the magnificent color portraits that Fray Filippo then proceeded to do. And finally, in great gratitude for the honor in this way brought upon him, Filippo owners returned the artist safely to Italy. We who toil for other people have all in some way been captured by pirates and sold into slavery. But like Fray Filippo, if to a lesser degree, most of us possess some gift, some talent, ability to do something better than other people. Make your master a gift of your talents, and you will rise above other quarters. Let him take the credit if necessary. It will only be temporary. Use him as a stepstone, a way of displaying your talent and eventually buying your freedom from enslavement. Alfonso I of Aragon had a servant who told the king that the night before he had a dream. Alfonso had given a gift of weapons, horses, and clothes. Alfonso, a generous, lordly man, decided it would be amusing to make this dream come true and promptly gave the servant exactly these gifts. A little while later, the same servant announced to Alfonso that he had another dream yet another dream. And in this one, Alfonso had given him a considerable pile of gold florins. The king smiled and said, "Don't believe in dreams from now on. They lie." In this treatment of the servant's first dream, Alfonso remained in control by making the dream come true. He claimed a godlike power for himself, if a mild and humorous way. In the second dream, however, all appearance of magic was gone. This was nothing but an ugly con game on the servant's part. Never ask for too much, then know when to stop. It is the master's prerogative to give when he wants and what he wants, and to do so without prompting. Do not give him the chance to reject your request. Better to win favors, deserving them, so that they are bestowed upon you without you asking. The great English landscape painter J.M.W. Turner, 1775 to 1851, was known for his use of color, which he applied with a brilliance and a stage iridescence. The color in his paintings was so striking, in fact, the other artists never wanted his work hung next to theirs. It inevitably made everything around it seem dull. The painter, Sir Thomas Lawrence, once had the misfortune of seeing Turner's masterpiece, Cologne, hanging in an exhibition between two works of his own. Lawrence complained bitterly to the gallery owner, who gave him no satisfaction. After all, someone's painting had to hang next to Turner's. But Turner heard of Lawrence's complaint, and before the exhibition opened, he toned down the brilliant golden sky into Cologne, making it as dull as the colors in Lawrence's work. A friend of Turner's who saw the painting approached the artist with a horrified look. "What have you done to your picture?" he said. "Well, poor Lawrence was so unhappy," Turner replied, "and it's only lamb black. It's washed off after exposition." Many of the courtier's anxieties have to do with the master, with whom most dangers lie. Yet it is a mistake to imagine that the master is the only one to determine your fate. Your equals and subordinates play integral parts also. A court is a vast stew of resentment, fears, and powerful envy. You have to placate everyone who might someday harm you, deflecting their resentment and envy, diverting their hostility onto others. Turner, eminent courtier, knew that his good fortune and fame depended on his fellow painters as well as on his dealers and patrons. How many of the great have been fellowed by envious colleagues? Better contemporarily to dull your brilliance than to suffer slings and arrows of envy. Winston Churchill was an amateur artist, and after World War II, his paintings became collections. The American publisher Henry Luce, in fact, creator of Time and Life magazine, kept one Churchill landscape hanging in his private office in New York. On a tour through the United States, once Churchill visited Luce in his office, and the two men looked at the painting together. The publisher remarked, "It's a good picture, but I think it needs something in the foreground, a sheep perhaps." Much to Luce's horror, Churchill's secretary called the publisher the next day and asked him to have the painting sent to England. Luce did so, mortified that he had perhaps offended the former prime minister. A few days later, however, the painting was shipped back, but slightly altered. A single sheep now gazed peacefully in the foreground. In stature and fame, Churchill stood head and shoulders above Luce, but Luce was certainly a man of power, so let us imagine a slightly inequity between them. Still, what did Churchill have to fear? An American publisher. Why bow to criticism of a dilettante? A court In this case, the entire world of diplomats and international statesmen, and also a journalist who court them, is a place of mutual dependence. It is unwise to insult or offend the taste of people of power, even if they are below or equal to you. If a man like Churchill can swallow the criticisms of a man like Lewis, he proves himself a quarter without peer. Perhaps his correction of the painting implied a certain concession as well, but he did it so subtly that Luce did not perceive any slight. Imitate Churchill, put in the sheep. It is also beneficial to play the obliging quarter, even when you are not serving a master. The delicate game of courtship, a warning. Talleyrand was consummate courtier, especially in serving his master Napoleon. When the two men first getting to know each other, Napoleon once said in passing, "I shall come to lunch at your house one of these days." Talleyrand had a house in Antoine, in the suburbs of Paris. "I should be delighted, mon general," the minister replied, "and since my house is close to Bois de Boulogne, you will be able to assume yourself with a bit of shooting in the afternoon." "I do not like shooting," said Napoleon, "but I love hunting. Are there any boars in the Bois de Boulogne?" Napoleon came from Corsica, where boar hunting was a great sport. But asking if there were boars in Paris Park, he showed himself still a provincial, almost a rube. Talleyrand did not laugh. However, he could not resist a practical joke on the man who was now his master in political policies. Although not in blood and nobility, since Talleyrand came from old aristocracy family. To Napoleon questions then, he replied, "Very few, my general, but I dare say you will manage to find one." It was arranged that Napoleon would arrive at Talleyrand's house the following afternoon, 7 a.m., and would spend the morning there. The boar hunt would take place in the afternoon. Throughout the morning, the excited general talked nothing but boar hunting. Meanwhile, Talleyrand frequently had his servants go to the market, buy 2 enormous black pigs, and take them to the great park. After lunch, the hunters and their bounds set off to Bois Boulogne. At a secret signal from Talleyrand, the servant loosened one of the pigs. "I see a boar," Napoleon cried joyfully, jumping onto his horse to give chase. Talleyrand stayed behind. It took half an hour galloping through the park before the boar was finally captured. At the moment of triumph, however, Napoleon was approached by one of his aides, who knew the creature could not possibly be a boar, and feared a general would be ridiculed once the story got out. "Sir," he told Napoleon, "you realize, of course, that this is not a boar but a pig." Flying into rage, Napoleon immediately set off a gallop for Talleyrand's house. He realized that the way that he would now be butt of many jokes, and exploiting the Talleyrand would only make him more ridiculous. It would be better to make a show of a good humor. Still, he did not hide his displeasure well. Talleyrand decided to try to soothe the general's bruised ego. He told Napoleon not to go back to Paris yet. He should again go hunting in the park. There was many rabbits there, and hunting them had been a favorite pastime of Louis XVI. Talleyrand even offered to let Napoleon use a set of guns that had once belonged to Louis. With much flattery and cajolery, he once again got Napoleon to agree to a hunt. The party left for the park in the late afternoon. Along the way, Napoleon told Talleyrand, "I'm not Louis XVI. I surely won't kill even one rabbit." Yet that afternoon, strangely enough, the park was teeming with rabbits. Napoleon killed at least 50 of them, and his mood changed from anger to satisfaction. At the end of his wild shooting spree, however, the same aide approached him and whispered in his ear, "To tell the truth, sir, I am beginning to believe these are not wild rabbits. I suspect that rascal Talleyrand has played another joke on us. The aide was right. Talleyrand had in fact sent his servants back to the market where they had purchased dozens of rabbits and then released them into Bois Boulogne. Napoleon immediately mounted his horse and galloped away, this time returning straight to Paris. He later threatened Talleyrand, warned him to tell a soul what happened. If he became the laughingstock of Paris, there would be a hell to pay. It took months for Napoleon to be able to trust Talleyrand again, and he never totally forgave him for his humiliation. Courtiers are like magicians. They deceptively play with appearances, only letting those around them see what they want them to see. With so much deception and manipulation afoot, it is essential to keep people from seeing your tricks and glimpsing your sleight of hand. Talleyrand was normally the grand wizard of courtship, but for Napoleon's aid, he probably would have gotten away completely with both pleasing his master and having a joke at the general's expense. But the courtship is a subtle art, and overlooked traps and inadvertent mistakes can ruin your best tricks. Never risk being caught in your maneuvers. Never let people see your devices. If that happens, you instantly pass in people's perception from a courtier of great manners to a loathsome rogue. It's a delicate game you play. Apply the utmost attention to covering your tracks and never let your master unmask you.